session, and before recess, Senator Yamashita had the floor and the question, of course, and, about the voting status of the mayor. Senator Yamashita, you still have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, during the short break, I did some research, and of course there are six members who are voted by our people and 3 who are appointed by the governor. There is the bill on the floor is to have a non-voting representative of determined by the Mayor's Council sit, and I had asked the question of whether this person should have the rights and responsibilities of being a voting member. And after I thought about it some more, if we did that, then that would raise the number to 10, the number of board members. And we all know that we try to have an uneven number, which would mean we'd have to figure out how to raise it to 11. And so, and then reviewing the committee report, Dr. Cruz, Mr. San Agustin, and Ms. Gutierrez, even though she was testifying as a private citizen, they all supported the notion of having a non-voting mayor on the board, but the question in front of them wasn't for a voting member, so that's a different question. And so I thought that if we were to move forward in making the composition even larger and in giving them a voting power without getting the input from the board members, I thought maybe we should slow it down a little bit. And at this point, I would support having a non-voting mayor on the board because I think, as the mover of this measure said, their perspectives are valuable and they see things from their lens, which would help us on our board level. So the question of why it's not, I think through some discussion and research, I'm suggesting for myself that I pull back and hold some more conversations about what that might look like at another time. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Yamashita. On the motion, Senator Munoz-Barnes.
Madam Speaker, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak and rise in support of Bill number 78-32 COR. Madam Speaker, I just want to take this time to thank the good author for asking that this August body include a representative from the Mayor's Council of Guam to be a part of the composition of the Guam Educational Board. As I've always stated, Madam Speaker, our mayors are the 24/7 responders of all the issues and concerns that happen within their village. It's noted here that the mayors time and time again have proven themselves to be contributing members to the Education Policy Board to include community involvement and, let alone from working closely with the schools that they have in their villages to listening to a lot of the needs, inclusive of making sure that they take care of a lot of the school grounds. Madam Speaker, I just want to say that having a representation from the Mayor's Council, even if it's a non-voting ex-official member at this time, I think it's a very positive thing. I think it's a good thing to get a representation from the mayors, but more importantly, that the mayor's input is a part of the educational board's policy. So I was hoping that there would be an amendment to make them a voting official, but again, I understand that we probably need to at least do a little bit more research or ask how we can make this work so that they could be voting members. But I just think for right now, just them being a part will be a positive success for the board. And I rise in full support. I want to thank the good author and speaker from Barragata for making this bill happen. Sana Masi.
You're welcome, Senator. On the motion, are there any other speakers? Speaker Pangilinan, would you like to close or you want to send it down?
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thanks to my colleagues for the discussion. I'd like to make just one amendment, Madam Speaker, and that would be to add Senator Tina Rose Munoz-Barnes as the second co-sponsor.
Okay. On that motion, without any objections, so ordered.
And then I'd like to move then the bill be placed in the third reading file.
On the motion to send 78-32 to the third reading file without any objections, so ordered. Yep, but I haven't read it yet, so yeah, so. On Bill 239, Senator Rodriguez. Okay. And 264. Where's 203? Oh, oh, you're ready now? So Senator Duenas, you're ready for 203? Okay, good. Okay, so you're recognized then on 203. Okay.
Sizus Masi, Madam Speaker. Malagudzu tapega esti pernoponi 203. Gimin address na tanaitay da malagudzu lokuita diskuti esti na pernoponi. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. At this time, I would like to place Bill 20332 in the third reading file and like to discuss it.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. First of all, Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank the Chairman for putting Bill 20332 on the session agenda. While there have been some marked changes that I will speak to in a moment, I want to share with you how this bill came into creation. I was sitting down with a friend over dinner one evening, and we discussed how public policy could be shaped to keep more money in the hands of our working families. As this discussion unfolded, we concluded that the rising price of oil was a real catalyst to the rising cost of living on Guam. It was with this conclusion that Bill 203 was born. According to an article that appeared in the Pacific Daily News at the time, the cost of a gallon of gas was $4.73. According to GPA, it would cost about $2.50 per gallon to fill up an electric vehicle. With this said, a family that spends $400 per month on gas after purchasing an electric vehicle would spend about $200 in electricity. That would leave a savings of $200 per month. This $200 per month will not go off island to the big oil companies in Singapore. It will stay with the working family that will have more money to spend on food at the local grocery store and on education supplies and on entertainment. This money would circulate in the economy. Our businesses would benefit as a result. Our working families would also benefit. An electric vehicle is, in this example, would give a working family $200 more money to spend each month. Imagine a Guam where you didn't have a gas station anymore, and you had an additional $200 in your pocket to spend every single month. This Guam is a reality. If we put public policy together that fast-tracks this kind of innovation into our local community. Now my concern. The original bill that I put forward earmarked $375,000 for this program and gave a rebate of $5,000 per vehicle. While the amount of the rebate might have seemed a bit high, the intent was to stimulate a behavior in which 50 people would have went out and purchased electric vehicles, exhausting the fund and introducing the technology to Guam. This would stimulate the behavior overnight and create new industries. This bill as substituted falls short from my original bill's intent to fast-track the innovation and stimulate new industry. This new bill reduces the rebate program to a mere $25,000 for a maximum rebate of a mere 5% of the vehicle cost at $30,000. What this amounts to a small 1,250 rebate for a maximum of 20 vehicles. In the substitute version of my bill, I don't believe a maximum rebate of 1,250 is enough to incentivize consumers to purchase electric vehicles. and I don't believe 20 vehicles on the road will be enough to transform our island with this new innovation. That being said, I will proffer 2 amendments. And so, Madam Speaker, I would like to introduce the first amendment at this point. And can I have our team please pass them out here on the floor? The first amendment, Madam Speaker, is going to be on section 45A 103 and will be amended to read, and I will find the line, Madam Speaker. So what we'll be doing with this amendment is on line 20, that should go to 10% of the base price. And basically,
Wait, so the first one that you have here that's underscored after the word rebate
right,
is page 3, line 19, after rebate, at those words underscored?
that's correct.
Okay, so, and to add that shall be calculated to consist of, and then, continue of not more than
10%.
10%. Okay, so is everyone able to follow? Okay, on that amendment, Speaker Pangilinan, you recognize.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I just wanted to kind of just offer some perspective from the committee side in terms of the change that was offered in this amendment from the original legislation. And that is just to inform the committee and the body itself also that in addition to the rebate being offered from local funds in this case, there's also a federal rebate. So the rebate that's being contemplated of being offered and paid out of the treasury of the government of Guam is not the only rebate available to the person who buys an electric vehicle, that there continues to be an electric vehicle rebate program authorized by the federal government in that respect. So that's the reason why we had kind of changed it down and so forth. So just to offer that perspective to the members of the body.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to speak on the amendment before I call for the adoption of it? Okay. So there being none, so no objections then to the 2 amendments, which is on page 3. At the end of line 19, we're after the word rebate to add the words that shall be calculated to consist then of not more than, rather than 5% of the increase now to 10%. No objections? So ordered. Senator, you still have the floor.
Madam Speaker, I do appreciate the comments of the retiring speaker, and I do understand that perspective. Just one more perspective, Madam Speaker, on the issue that was brought up. The testimony from at least one of the companies that now has brought in a fully electric vehicle and has taken that step to do that, Madam Speaker, they had mentioned in their analysis and in their consumer base that because of the high rate of tax rebates on Guam in terms of the financial structure and the middle class existence and those who would purchase this vehicle trying to save money and trying to save money on fuel, it might not be eligible for that federal rebate because they would have to have a tax offset that would actually have a taxable income, whereby most folks within this category would probably fall into the area of getting a tax refund, actually. So it won't necessarily affect some of this population. That was some of the discussion, but I do appreciate the comments of the retiring speaker. So, Madam Speaker, my next amendment then would be, in light of this amendment passing, to change the appropriation level then, and that would come under 45A105 section of the bill. And so basically what we would do then, Madam Speaker, the amendment would be to change the $25,000 to $300,000 for a maximum of 100 vehicles. And Madam Speaker, as I spoke about earlier, in the committee report, there is no indication, basically, using the original requirements contained in the bill as introduced. The committee report contains no explanation, basically, listed it for the substitute appropriation and the rationale for phasing out the rebate program or containing it just to this first 20 vehicles or now with this 100 vehicles. So we would like to evaluate this proposal. Madam Speaker, I would like to also say that this is going to require, of course, our action within the fiscal year 15 budget. So if you really look at this policy, it's a commitment. It's a commitment to much of the incentives that even the good speaker from Barragata and our goals for renewables 2020, 20% by 2020. This is an initiative that can help bring us there. And so we'll debate, I think, the merits of the appropriation at the appropriate time during the budget cycle, Madam Speaker. But to identify this commitment at this point, I think, is still a solid movement forward by this legislature. And in order to follow through on the commitment of the earlier amendment, I think this appropriation level would be the right appropriation level. And I think, Madam Speaker, also, it is a good compromise even from the first $375,000. So that would be the second amendment, Madam Speaker.
On the amendment, Speaker Pangilinan, you recognize?
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise in opposition to this. Because what this does, Madam Speaker, is number one, if you take a look at the allocation of electric vehicles to the dealers, there's only one dealer that's bringing in an all-electric vehicle right now. And their allocation is only 10 cars a year. So why are we going to set aside $300,000 for 100 cars when they only get 10 a year? And I think if we're going to evaluate it, then we should evaluate it on a yearly basis rather than setting aside $300,000 of the FY 2015 budget. This money is now no longer available to support education, public health, public safety, the prison, GPD, and we're saying that the first thing we're going to fund from collections in 2015 is electric vehicles. I support electric vehicles. I support protecting the environment, but we have other priorities that I believe need to be looked at before we do this. And so to say that, it's okay because it comes from 2015, we have no single appropriation from 2015 revenues at this time, other than what we already have set aside and locked ourselves into, which are our debt service and our tax refunds. And then this becomes next, over and above education, public health, public safety. Madam Speaker, the $25,000 appropriation, Madam Speaker, I think takes us to what I think is reasonable. There's no money at this time available in the allocation that the governor sent down in his budget for 2015 to support a $300,000 appropriation without cutting anything else. And so, Madam Speaker, I really think we're jumping the gun with regards to setting aside $300,000 from 2015 revenues. Let's put the $25,000 in. Let's see how it works out. Let's see how many cars are bought. The last time we checked with Nissan, they had brought in 10 cars, and I think 5 are sitting on the lot still, even with the federal rebate, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, I know that we're saying, oh my God, we need to give them this rebate because the poor people need to buy the car. Because the group of people that we're targeting for this are those that don't have a tax liability, that get a refund, so they need a rebate. Madam Speaker, if you look at demographics of who buys electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles, it's not the poor that buys it. And even with the rebate, the statistics, the empirical data doesn't support that is the market that we're targeting. We're targeting the socially conscious, economically viable citizen in terms of being able to fork out the money to buy these vehicles. So, Madam Speaker, while I certainly commend the author and support the intention, I just think that setting aside $300,000 of FY 2015 revenues before we set aside any revenues for education, public safety, public health, is jumping the gun on this respect. And I ask my colleagues, we are making $25,000 available in this bill, and that's still, even with the 10% increase in the rebate, that still gives you 7 to 10 vehicles, 7 to 8 vehicles a year, which is the total allocation given to the dealership for electric vehicles, because they don't get as many as they want. They only get a certain number, and that's all they get for their dealership, and then all the other vehicles go elsewhere. So, Madam Speaker, I say that we can fund what is being brought on island with the $25,000. We can evaluate it, and then during the budget cycle, as we move forward in the budget cycle, then we can debate, should we take $300,000 from education or from anywhere else and allocate it and prioritize rebates for electric vehicles in this respect. But I think to have that argument without having all the other needs of the government of Guam and the people of Guam in terms of government services in the areas of education, public health, public safety, medical care, etc., be part of that debate, I think at this time that would be, in my position as budget chair, inappropriate at this time. And so I request my colleagues for some understanding and some restraint in terms of expenditure of funds that we don't even have a great grasp on. We haven't even adopted the revenue numbers, but we're going to take $300,000 out of it to support electric vehicles. I just think that that debate should occur during the budget process, as the good mover of the amendment said, instead of ahead of the budget process. And that's exactly what this amendment does. It puts that debate ahead of the budget process and not part of it. Thank you, and again, I reiterate my opposition to this amendment. Thank you.
You're welcome. On the amendment, Senator Mike Nicholas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I appreciate the direction that Bill 203 is heading in terms of trying to encourage our people to support a more environmentally friendly and economically viable electric type of automobile. I do agree, though, with the retiring speaker. I think us going all the way up to the amount of $300,000 may be a little premature. And just to kind of put it into perspective, the author of the bill we all worked together to try and make an amount similar to $300,000 available to Sanctuary just recently in order for them to be able to continue their operations to the end of the fiscal year. We made it very clear to Sanctuary that come the next fiscal year, that amount may not necessarily be available, and they need to go out and find federal grants or other resources to be able to continue their operations. But we all came together in order for them to be able to continue up until October of this year. This $300,000 represents almost exactly the amount that they would have needed to continue into next fiscal year. We appropriated $288,000 to them, more or less, in the last session that we had. And so if this full $300,000 was made available to them, they wouldn't need to sweat over money come October. So there's just some trade-offs that we really need to consider here. But I am in favor of the direction the author is taking us, and I do think that maybe if we lower the amount from $300,000 down to $30,000, we would still be able to give out 10 rebates a year. It will situate this action into law so that we can revisit it every year, and as we normally do in the course of business, amend it upwards if we think that it's something worth investing more people's money into. I think getting it started would be a very good thing. I think $30,000 may be a better place to start in terms of a ceiling. But going to 300 just off the bat to go out and say we're going to rebate 100 cars, it's aggressive. I like it, but I would prefer that we phase it in a little bit more judiciously as we come up into the budget cycle. And maybe come budget time, we might say, hey, you know what? Why don't we go to 300? It looks like we are going to be able to have the resources for that. But at this time, I'd be more comfortable with the commitment at 30,000, and I would like to implore the author if he'd be so willing for us to just go ahead and start at that level and see where we go from here between now and October. Because again, that amount could theoretically, for example, Sanctuary, keep them and their operations going as opposed to them having to go out source the funds federally or elsewhere. So I would like to echo the concerns of the retiring speaker and applaud the author for taking us down this course, and I hope that we can find some comfortable starting point with this Bill 203. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator. On the amendment, Senator Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of the amendment. I know the previous speaker mentioned earlier that, yes, there is really one dealer here that brought out about 6 to 10 electric vehicles. I attended that opening ceremony. Clearly, Madam Speaker, this amendment or this model is to encourage our consumers to look to this option. We've all been talking about our reliance on foreign oil, and this is one example of reducing our dependence on foreign oil by looking at this alternative through electric vehicles. Yes, there's just one dealer putting out vehicles, but we have 2 dealers that also have models out there, electric vehicle models that are ready to go. However, I don't think Guam is providing the necessary incentives to encourage mainstream consumers to take part in these programs. Tax incentives and rebate programs, Madam Speaker, are a major trend throughout the nation. And in Hawaii, I think Guam is perfect for this. The climate's perfect right now. And again, Madam Speaker, I know we talk about reducing the number here from 300,000 to 30,000, but I'm not sure what we're talking about when previously we spoke about transitioning all our lights to LED lights, and it seems like when it comes to something of a great initiative like this to provide our consumers an opportunity to transition to a transportation alternative that can reduce the cost not only on their household, but importantly on our reliance on foreign oil. So, Madam Speaker, I rise in support of this amendment, and I hope our colleagues can ensure that we not only encourage, like we've seen with Nissan, who has brought in the Leaf. We know there's Chevy Volt. We know it's the Ford Focus EVs. But again, I believe through this type of model or legislation or this amendment, it would encourage Chevy and Ford to also bring out the electric vehicle. So, Madam Speaker, let's open this up and allow our consumers to participate largely, greatly. Thank you.
You're welcome, Senator. On the motion, are there any others who would like to speak? Senator, would you like to close?
Madam Speaker, I'm highly encouraged by the debate. We definitely have a start here. I would like to basically say, though, I do agree with the retiring speaker. Madam Speaker, this incentive as testified to and that exists within the committee report is exactly what, in our research, at least 2 dealers came forward to say the commitment of the jurisdiction has to be there in order to generate the behavior, in order to generate their interest in sending these type of vehicles to the destination. It is the type of change and transformation that, from a dealership perspective, requires incentives, commitments, and that is one of the reasons why other jurisdictions have really, those dealers have sent those vehicles, even throughout the continental U.S., to those particular locations where there is policy in place and commitment to support that transformation that starts the behavioral change. Madam Speaker, I do certainly respect the budget chairman's perspective. Of course, he has to wrestle along with us, but he's the first wrestler, I guess, of what happens with the budget. I do say, though, I don't think that this is saying this is more of a priority than education. We're going to deal with a number of measures, a couple, I think, in this session we have dealt, and we probably will deal with a few more measures going forward within this body. that will require or ask for appropriations that to be dealt with in the 15 budget. So I don't think this is unique to that. I think everything will be taken into consideration during that time for its value and funding sources found, and we'll end up prioritizing at the end of the day. I do also agree with the retiring speaker from Talafofo that, you know, the issue of when we jump and rise to the occasion of taking care of needs that arise in our community, yes, there's a similarity when it comes to that appropriation level. Once again, Madam Speaker, that appropriation was born out of an anticipated revenue that one of our other colleagues here gave, actually the first bill that anticipated that revenue to take care of our judiciary. So yes, there are times, and it's always a give and take here on the floor, and regardless of what session we're in terms of how we will recognize what the capabilities are of this government to support programs. And Madam Speaker, just in closing on this amendment, I can say that in a number of meetings that I've been to with the hybrids, that behavior that's been committed to already, I can say it is a lot of folks out there, and maybe with the hybrid, a little bit different than the fully electric, but it is the common everyday folks that I see buying those vehicles, realizing the benefit and the savings, and I know a lot of those people with the Priuses and other vehicles that are getting tax returns, tax refunds. So just to put it hopefully in perspective, but Madam Speaker, I will say I'm encouraged though by all of the commitment that was expressed. I'll see what we can do with this appropriation level and stand by the amendment, and we'll see how the vote goes. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator. So there is an objection to the amendment, which is to, on page 4, to increase the appropriated amount from 25,000 to 300,000. So all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay. All in favor of the amendment proffered by Senator Duenas up to 300,000. The amendment fails.
Madam Speaker, can we count that again?
Okay, so there's an objection to that again. Let's take a brief recess.
Yes, Madam Speaker. Before the recess, I was requesting, notwithstanding the House rules, a reconsideration on the vote on the objection of the amendment that I had proffered. Could we please have a revote, Madam Speaker?
And there was before then, before it was formalized an objection, some for those then who are in favor of the reconsideration of the vote and notwithstanding, please raise your hand. To waive it, yes. Huh? Yeah, that's true. This is just to waive the rules first, okay? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so that motion passes. So then,
Madam Speaker, having that motion having passed, I request now that we take the vote on the objection of the former amendment as proffered.
okay. So the vote would be then for the $300,000 be appropriated from the general fund. Okay, so all in favor then of the amendment, please raise your hand. Okay, the motion carries. Okay, is there anybody else who'd like to speak on the main motion? There being none, Senator, to close, send it down. So on the motion then to send Bill number 203-32 to the third reading file without any objections, so ordered. Mr. Vice Speaker, can you cover up here?
We're on Bill 216. Madam Speaker, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to make a motion to place substituted Bill 216-32 LS to third reading file, and if I could just briefly explain what this is. Actually, the title is Enacting Principles of Balanced Approach and Restorative Justice in the Juvenile Criminal Justice System between the victim and the offender. That's Bill 216 as substituted.
Any objection? Hearing none.
Thank you again very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, since our island is a close-knit community, it is incredibly important to take a community approach when responding to crime. Justice is not simply punishment. It must be holistic and effective, especially when dealing with juveniles. As the Chief Justice expressed in his State of the Judiciary address last week, judges should use their power to sentence offenders in a way that reduces the likelihood that they would again cause harm. He went on to say that judges have the power to, and I'll quote him, to fix people rather than fill prisons, end of quote. And this concept is catching fire in the criminal justice systems throughout the country. He added that it is his goal to see this concept grow in our local courts. This is also the concept behind restorative justice in Bill 216. This bill encourages our criminal system to use balanced and restorative justice approaches when responding to juveniles who have been charged with or convicted of criminal offenses, excluding acts of serious crimes against people and property, or involving sexual or family violence. Restorative justice emphasizes repairing the harm caused by the crime by allowing victims, offenders, and members of the community to meet and determine how to address the crime and to prevent it from happening again in the future. Restorative justice treats crime as an offense against an individual or a community, and not against a state. Thus, in responding to this offense, restorative justice focuses on the personal needs of victims, offenders, and community members, and provides services to the offender aimed at preventing future offenses. So the ultimate goal of restorative justice, especially when dealing with juveniles, is to prevent our youth from getting caught in a cycle of crime. In his address, the Chief Justice stated, and I quote, "The research shows that our reliance on incarceration for young people does not reduce their likelihood of reoffending. Indeed, it may just do the opposite, exposing low-risk youth to violence and abuse and putting some on the path to adult criminality. I believe," and that's the Chief Justice, "that the percentage of adult offenders with prior juvenile records is further proof that the current practices simply do not work," end of quote. So while Bill 216 provides a creative approach to addressing crime, this approach is not new to our island. Much like the concept of restorative justice, our Chamorro ancestors resolved conflicts and decided punishment within the family. In fact, a deep reverence for one's family often prevented people from committing crime. Restorative justice allows for a more collaborative response to crime. It promotes dialogue between victims and offenders and between their families with the intention of repairing the harm that was done. This exchange can take many forms, most notably through conferencing models, victim-offender dialogue, and the circle process through which participants are given equal opportunity to share with a sense of mutual respect and responsibility for the well-being of the community. Providing victims and their families with a direct voice in determining just outcomes is very powerful. It not only allows for reconciliation, it has been proven to reduce recidivism. Communities using a restorative model as a large-scale solution to wrongdoing have been able to minimize the social and fiscal costs of crime. I look forward to the positive benefits of restorative justice in our island community, and I encourage this body to move favorably on Bill 216 as it would help to reduce crime in our community and offer our at-risk youth the opportunity for a better future. And I'd like to also thank my colleagues who has decided to join me in co-sponsoring this bill, Senator Tina Rose Muñoz-Barnes and Senator Aline Yamashita. And, and it doesn't mean, of course, that if your names aren't here, it doesn't mean you can't support this bill. So I'm hoping then that you give due consideration and favorable consideration to voting in favor of Bill 216-32. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Any other senator wish to be heard on the motion? Any senator wish to be heard? Seeing no hands go up, and the movement has asked that the bill be moved to third reading file. Hearing no objection. We're now on Bill 220. Senator Respicio, you're recognized. Mr. Majority Leader, 220. Senator Ada on 220. What is this? Is this going in? No. Senator Rodriguez, Bill 229. Oh, set aside. 264. All right, Bill 275.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, move to place Bill 275-32 as substituted by the committee on third reading and be allowed to briefly discuss it.
Yes, you may proceed, Senator.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Bill 275 is an act to ensure the sanctity of the medical peer review process at the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority. The medical peer review process is well established in federal law and is intended to protect and ensure the quality of medical services being provided by a physician. It provides the means pursuant to strict guidelines by which a physician's conduct and competence can be reviewed by his professional medical peers. The Healthcare Quality Improvement Act states that a healthcare entity, including hospitals, must report to the National Practitioners Data Bank, which is NPDB, each time it takes a professional review action that adversely affects the clinical privileges of physicians for a period longer than 30 days. The issue at GMH, Madam Speaker, that raised serious concerns by hospital physicians was what they saw as a circumvention of the process strictly for the purpose of minimizing GMH's legal and financial liability. The issue at the forefront was the prior peer review action, finding and determination was being overturned by the Board of Trustees in a manner contrary to applicable federal law, rules, and regulation. The board was unilaterally seeking to void the findings and have the professional medical peer review action removed from the National Practitioners Data Bank. As stated by the Director of Division of the National Practitioner Data Bank from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, in a communication it sent to the hospital on September 10, 2012, reporting clinical privileges actions and certain other adverse actions against healthcare practitioners is mandatory and cannot be the subject of negotiations. Any such attempts would be viewed as trying to shirk the law. End quote. This communication was relative to the actions by the hospital board to void a GMHA medical peer action conducted by qualified medical professionals, all for the purpose of pursuing a negotiated settlement agreement in an effort to avoid litigation. As to the settlement agreement, the Board of Trustees relied on advice of prior legal counsel without due consideration of the sanctity of the medical peer review process. They did not exercise due diligence and their fiduciary responsibility to examine the issue firsthand. They should not have simply assumed that everything was appropriate and relied solely on the decisions and actions initiated by a prior Board of Trustees. And during a oversight hearing the last term, Madam Speaker, even the hospital medical director at that time stated that the settlement agreement reversing the findings and determinations of the Medical Executive Committee was not in the best interests of the hospital or of the peer review process at the hospital. Bill 275, Madam Speaker, provides for a graduated process consistent with applicable federal law and the National Practitioner Data Bank's rules and regulations. There is an initiating process of a medical peer review. This must be followed by an appeal. Both would take place under the auspices of the hospital medical professionals and the Medical Executive Committee. It will be based upon the determination of medical competence, not the convenience of minimizing litigation. This would be followed, if so moved, by the physician appellant, by the availability of an appeal to the Guam Board of Medical Examiners. Again, this is consistent with applicable National Practitioner Data Bank's rules and regulations. The final level of review would be the Guam courts. Once again, this is in compliance with the National Practitioner Data Bank rules and regulations. Only upon a successful appeal may the findings be requested to be removed from the National Practitioners Data Bank. And so, Madam Speaker, what this is a result of of an oversight hearing and an issue that was brought forth before the 31st Guam Legislature. And so the committee this term continued to pursue this matter to ensure that the sanctity of the peer review process in the hospital is preserved. And so by moving this forward, it sets up in statute the procedures in how peer reviews are conducted, and procedures on how these peer reviews by professionals, by medical professionals, could be considered for any overturning of findings that are done within those peer reviews. And so, with that, Madam Speaker, I'd like to be able to add an amendment on page 3, after line 23. This adds a new sub-item 1 to N1 to read: the board shall provide for third-party peer review services for those peer review proceedings wherein the physician who is the subject of a peer review asserts that an impartial proceeding cannot otherwise be achieved. And so, you don't have? Okay.
We
We'll
don't
get
have a copy of the amendment.
Page 3, if I can.
Do you have copies of it already?
No. But we can make copies of it.
Okay, so we're going to take a brief recess because that's a
Okay.
long one. Thank you. The legislature is back in session. Senator Rodriguez, you do have the floor, and I think everybody also has a copy of the amendment, and we can please read it then for the record.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, yes, the amendment would be to include the following sentence: the board shall provide for third-party peer review services for those peer review proceedings wherein the physician who is the subject of a peer review asserts that an impartial proceeding cannot otherwise be achieved. And so, Madam Speaker, what this does is that when there's a peer review process that takes place, it's first within the department wherever the peer review, the physician is at. And then after that, it goes on to the Medical Executive Committee, the MEC. And at that point, that's where once a determination is made there, and the physician who is being reviewed feels that it's not going to get a fair hearing or proceeding at that point, could now request that a third party, independent third party service be allowed to review that case, that specific case. And so that's going to happen with this amendment. And then, of course, if again the physician is not satisfied with the results of that peer review process, then of course could appeal this to the Guam Board of Medical Examiners, and then ultimately to the courts.
Okay, on the amendment, Senator Munya Barnes? Senator, do you yield to the question?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yes, I would try to. As we know now, the hospital has engaged the services of an independent company that does peer reviews, and so I think the question is, does that involve a person that's outside the medical process? I said no. It's still within the a person that does these peer reviews.
Okay, Senator, are you okay? All right. So on the amendment, no one else? Are there any objections? No objections, then so ordered. You still have the floor, Senator. That's it. So on the motion, is there anyone who'd like to speak on the main motion? There being none, so on the motion then to send Bill 275-32 to third reading file, no objections, so ordered. Bill number 267, Senator San Nicolas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to make a motion to place Bill number 267 on the third reading file and an opportunity to briefly speak on Bill 267.
You may proceed, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Bill 267 is intended to update our building enforcement laws so that we're able to assess a fine on commercial and industrial zone properties that are considered unsafe as defined throughout Bill 267. This piece of legislation was crafted in correspondence with the chair of the committee and co-author of the legislation, Senator Tom Atta, who has been on top of this issue for quite some time. We've made some updates to include the Guam Building Code Council as opposed to the Contractors License Board as requested by both bodies. And we've also included some language for the facilitation of formal communications between the building inspector, who is the director of the Department of Public Works, and whoever the property owners may be as defined by law. Again, this is an update of what is already existing statute, but we're tightening the language up, because what the pre-existing language was that if the building was unsafe, just vacating the building was enough to comply with Guam law. What we're basically doing now is we're saying you must vacate it and you must thereafter repair or demolish the building in order to be in compliance with Guam law. And failure to repair or demolish the unsafe building on commercial or industrially zoned properties only will result in the assessment of a fine. We did not, for a very intended purpose, include residential structures, and that's because there was some communication with us in the formulation of this legislation that while there is an interest in addressing a lot of the abandoned and unsafe residential structures, moving in the direction of codifying a penalty structure into law may have the adverse effect of creating even more homelessness on the island, as there are a lot of substandard houses on the island, and it's a very sad reality, but it's a problem that we need to address with the overall question of housing in mind. So that being said, we don't want to hold off on the need for us to address blight on the island. We don't want to hold off on the need for us to address abandoned buildings. We do understand that there is a need to address residential properties. However, in light of the challenges of addressing everything in one single stroke, we do want to move this element forward, and that is just the commercial and industrially zoned properties. We're confident that we can take this necessary step and help address what a lot of us view as a concern that needs to begin moving forward. We are interested in trying to find some kind of a solution on the residential side. We do know that it is a community concern, but again, we don't want to hold up some kind of progress, at least on the industrial and commercial side, or trying to answer that greater question that's going to require so much more resources and so many more moving parts that need to be coordinated. So we like to thank the input of the public as well as our colleagues on this matter. We look forward to any potential concerns or questions or amendments to make this better. But I think that we can all generally come to an agreement that the need to address commercial and industrially zoned buildings and properties that are unsafe needs to have a further tightening of the law that involves a penalty. And just for the record, Madam Speaker, we do also create an escape clause in here, so to speak, wherein within 180 days after the building inspector notifying the property owner, if they do in fact repair or demolish the building as requested within 6 months, 180 days, they will have their fines waived by the Guam Building Council. That is written in here. So it's not like you're going to get tagged with a fine and you're stuck with it. You do have a way to get out of it if you do address the concern. And ultimately what our people want, what our island needs, is for us to address these abandoned properties, these unsafe structures. We're not looking to find people, we're looking to address the problem. But in order for us to do that, we do need to tighten up the law a little bit. We do need to create a penalty that's going to incentivize or disincentivize a lack of action or to incentivize action. We want this to move forward, and it will be good for Guam. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Welcome, Senator. On the motion, I have Senator Tina Rose Munya-Barnes.
Situs Masi, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I don't have a problem with the intent of this bill. As a matter of fact, I support its efforts, and I applaud the efforts of Senator San Nicolas and Senator Ada. I do just want to ask or pose an inquiry to the author as it relates to buildings that are under the Guam Historic and Preservation Trust. You know that there are some facilities and some properties that are under the purview of Guam Preservation Trust that they've been working on, and I know that some of those projects are just waiting for funding sources. And have those facilities or those properties been exempted from this effort? And I know that since the inception of the enactment of the building codes, since Public Law 1-88, I just want to make sure, I don't have it in front of me, I just want to make sure that the Guam Historic and Preservation Trust has that opportunity to protect what they need to rightfully fix that's considered historic. And I think it's facilities over 50, 100 years old.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Senator, do you yield to the question?
I do, Madam Speaker. That is a very good question from our Chair of Tourism, who's always on the lookout, too, for making sure these historical sites are fully protected. That is not an exemption that's placed in this bill. It would be a wise one. So if the good senator would be interested in proffering an amendment, we'd be more than welcome to accept it.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the good author for that answer. So if you can just give me a couple of minutes
Yes.
to talk to legal counsel so I can have an amendment drawn up for that.
We'll take a
Thank you.
recess. Legislature is back in session. Senator Munya Barnes, and Sen, you have an amendment.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, thank you for that brief recess and giving me the opportunity to work with legal counsel to prepare an amendment. And if I may, this amendment would be on page 5, line 15. And if I can just go ahead and read it, it would say, 1, notify in writing by personal service, a certified mail or registered mail, the State Historic Preservation Officer, and then the same parties. And Madam Speaker, again, based on sharing with my colleagues earlier about those buildings that are under or may be or that could be under the State Historic Preservation Trust, I think that this will go ahead and satisfy and give notification to them. So I'm hoping my colleagues will support me in this effort of this amendment. And I also want to thank you for sharing this concern and being a co-sponsor to this amendment.
On the amendment, no objections, or thank you, Senator.
And I support the bill.
Is there anybody else who would like to speak on Bill 267? Yes. Senator, would you like to close? Okay, so on the motion to send 267 to the third reading file without any objections, so ordered. Senator Munya Barnes on 279.
Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I like to move 279-32 LS to the third reading, and if I can speak on it, please.
Yes, Senator, you may proceed.
Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this bill 279-32 LS, as introduced by myself and Senator Yamashita, I'd like to thank her for sharing her interest in continuing to protect our environment, and also, Madam Speaker, yourself. I do know that when this bill was introduced that you were off island, and you have been working really closely with me in these efforts and trying to continue to recycle, to promote a greener, cleaner, healthier Guam. But this bill, Madam Speaker, is an act to provide for a Guam Environmental Protection Agency conducted sustainable materials management study and implementation of a one-year pilot project demonstrating the ability of Guam to develop a beneficial use for discarded glass bottles that would, among other things, divert glass from the Ladzon Municipal Sanitary Landfill and for other purposes. Madam Speaker, if I may, this bill seeks to do three main things. And A is that it requires that the Guam Environmental Protection Agency to commission a study regarding sustainable materials management focusing on glass. And the reason this is necessary is to assure whatever project is implemented that it can be successful. Letter B is it requires that GIPA to implement a one-year pilot project based on the study. And C, it will allow for the use of the Recycling Revolving Fund to be used to fund this study and the project. Madam Speaker, this bill is asking from the Recycling Revolving Fund $250,000 for this project. I want to share with you, Madam Speaker, and to my colleagues here, that it is estimated that every year over 120,000 pounds of glass makes its way to the Ladzon landfill. If an economically viable solution is available, then it should be pursued, and this bill provides the means to explore that avenue, to get glass from going into Luzon. If we do not provide the means to explore this option at this time, the landfill will unnecessarily continue to accept glass products and therefore continue to shorten the life of the landfill. Madam Speaker, I want to say that I will continue to work with you and my colleagues here to continue to protect our environment. And I just want to say that this is one way, this Bill 279-32 LS is one way of the many steps that we have taken in this direction. Madam Speaker, you and I know that in our efforts for us, sometimes when you take trash and get creative and think of opportunities, think of trash as a commodity, I'd like for our people to think that same way, is if we were to take the glass and lengthen the opportunity for the sales at Luzon to last longer, so taking that trash of glass out of there, but turning that into possible opportunities of what glass could be utilized and used for, it could be a win-win for everybody. So I do know that there's opportunity out there. I do know that in our efforts of continuing the recycling process, that this is a good thing for Guam. There have been folks in the community who support this effort, and you and I just recently had a visit from folks that work closely with us from Corazon City, saying that even looking at the opportunity of recycling on glass and tires and implementing our bottle bill, that it continues to be win-win because they could use that stuff for other means and to make other things. And I know that one of the opportunities was to turn glass, pulverize it, and use it as part of the recycling efforts to make parts for aggregate for asphalt on that pavement. So, Madam Speaker, as we continue to look at zero waste concept and cleaning Guam and keeping Guam greener and cleaner, I'm hoping and that my colleagues will help me support this effort. And if you don't mind at this time, before I do it on closing, just so I don't forget, if I can add you as third co-sponsor on this bill, the three women.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I certainly support the intent of the bill, and I'm sure that there are many benefits that can be obtained from such a program. However, I do have some questions, and I'll just get to it right away. On page 2, section 2, it directs the Guam Environmental Protection Agency to go out and obtain contractual professional services to develop and implement a one-year pilot project. And I'm just wondering, this implies then that there is no expertise whatsoever at the Guam at the agency to be able to put together a pilot project. But I question the need to direct them to go out and contract professional services, not knowing if in fact they have in-house expertise. Maybe they. I'm just, maybe if the author would yield as to why that needs to be there, and if it's not, then I would recommend that we delete it.
Senator, do you yield to the question?
Yes, Madam Speaker. We've been working closely with the Guam Environmental Protection Agency, and we've been working with their support staff, and it was at their request that in order to move these programs forward, there had to be a collaboration, and they did provide us with a baseline budget, a proposal of what they could, what they would need to utilize this program moving forward. There was a breakdown submitted to us, and I could provide it for public record.
Senator,
And
Gabriel-
if I may, the proposed contract or the distribution would be issue a contract for professional services to conduct a solid waste assessment to establish a baseline of data on discarded glass by collecting background information that includes at a minimum but limited to the types and quantity, the current purchasing trends, waste generation and management practices, and to identify potential waste reduction options for further evaluation.
That's fine. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm just concerned that basically, I mean, the way line 30 reads right now is that the development and the implementation of the program must be basically undertaken by contractual professional services. So I think that if we were to delete those three words, contractual professional services, then it really gives them more flexibility to be able to use the money that's being appropriated either for that or for whatever. I would move that we simply delete, and that doesn't take away from the program because it still provides that they will go out and develop it. Now, if in developing and implementing the program they have to hire, then fine, go and do it. But otherwise, let's not lock them in that they have to go out and contract for professional services. So my motion would be on line 30 to delete the words contractual professional services.
On the amendment, take a brief recess. Back in session. Senator Ada, you still have the floor.
Si Zeus Mase, Madam Speaker, pues eu proponin para tana suhay zi tres na palabra nagi line 13 30
30.
Ezi tres na palabra ni contractual professional services sa zanggen tapologit kumikiling niya doon at tisina matsogi ni siha pa tisina man hono ulogi University of Guam pero ma spia no estudyante ni sinat sumogwis na project pues like ko na tanasua doon na palabra lo taus tapolo papa ginigi section 3 na edzi $250,000 ni puma-appropriate na para puma-appropriate po rason na para sina man mamahan makina pat sina no ma-posi no officer na professional services ni tumungo po siya na klaseng programa lo zangin taatan edzi section 3 edzo aleg niya para ta appropriate $250,000 lo ti like na hafa na para matsowi sina mausa para fan no grupo para guato Amerika po mabisita hafa siya na fasilidad na matsotsugi este.
Okay, on the amendment on page 3, section 2 on page 2, yes. On line 30 is to delete contractual professional services. I'm sorry? Taza? Taza objection? So ordered. Lalo.
Madam Speaker, I think so then the amendment should read the Guam Environmental Protection Agency shall develop and implement a one-year pilot project. So then
Okay,
So
so
then,
also delete obtain and to.
obtain and yes.
Okay, so it'll read Guam Environmental Protection Agency shall develop and implement.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so no objections to obtain to delete. So ordered. You
Yes,
still
Madam
have the
Speaker.
floor, Senator.
And then going to section 3, as we read it right now, the sum of $250,000 is being appropriated, but it's really it's rather it can be used for anything. And as I stated, they can be used to go travel to Malaysia to take a look at their facilities there, which I'm sure it's not. But we may probably want to put in there on line 36 language that would read $250,000 is hereby appropriated from the recycling fund for the purpose of, I would have to sit down and read, but something to the effect of, for the purpose of purchasing equipment, professional services, and others and related services that to develop and implement the pilot program. Professional, okay, for the purpose
Okay, I'm
of
going to give you an opportunity to put that together in writing. We're in recess. You still have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to amend on line 36 of Section 3 to read that $250,000 is hereby appropriated from the Recycling Revolving Fund to add the words procure equipment and services in support of, and then pick up on line 37, the pilot project mandated under Section 2 of this Act.
Okay, and I know you have that in writing, but one more time to repeat for the clerk is to procure equipment and services in support of the pilot project mandated under Section 2 of this Act.
Yes, ma'am.
Did everyone get that, more importantly, the clerks? Okay. No objections? So ordered. Senator, you still have the floor.
And then finally, if we take a look at Section 3, on line 37, it says that any unexpended funds remaining in the GIPA budget at the conclusion of the Sustainable Materials Management Study and its attendant pilot project shall be returned to the Recycling Revolving Fund. But then the next sentence says that this appropriation will continue to be available until expended and is not subject to inter-fund borrowing, et cetera, et cetera. So either we want it to continue to be available until expended, or at the end of the project, we return whatever is excess. So which do we want? The second. So I'll make the motion that to read starting on line 37 with the words any unexpended, to delete the phrase then any unexpended funds remaining in the GIPA budget at the conclusion, et cetera, shall be returned to the recycling fund. Delete all that and simply state that this appropriation will continue to be available until expended and is not subject to inter-fund borrowing.
I don't think these two are the same, because you're talking about
I know
a
they're not the
revolving
same.
fund
That's what I'm
and the
saying.
budget.
They're contradictory.
Yes, so we're going to take a brief recess. Session, Senator Ada, you please read to us then your amendment again.
Okay, my amendment, Madam Speaker, is starting on line 37, starting with the words "any expended" at the end of that sentence. So it would delete the sentence "any unexpended funds remaining in the Guam Environmental Protection Agency's budget at the conclusion of the Sustainable Materials Management Study and its attendant pilot project shall be returned to the recycling revolving fund." Delete all that. And instead, then, what happens is that the next sentence makes these funds available until expended.
Okay. Okay, everybody now? All right, thank you. No objection, so ordered. Thank you very much, Senator. You still have the floor. You're done? Okay. Hadji talo malago komento si Senator Morrison. Oh, esta? Speaker Pangilinan? Puncuentes? Yes. O gangaw? We recognize you.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, if I may suggest, GOOLE.com. Google it, and you will find hundreds, if not thousands, of studies on what to use with crushed glass. As a matter of fact, Madam Speaker, this body passed a law, which I introduced, which required all local contractors to buy crushed glass if it's available for road paving projects on government projects. And what we were trying to do there was create a market for crushed glass. And the viability of that market, obviously, we've continued to work with private companies to try to get them to invest in a glass crusher so that they can crush the glass and, of course, use it in pavements, in curbs and gutters, in swales, things that may not be subject to weight restrictions, but provide for a beneficial use during the construction of that. So this idea that we're going to spend another $250,000 on a pilot study, Madam Speaker, to me is just, it really hurts. We don't have enough money for the schools. We don't have enough money for cops. You know, we're searching for money for police cars. And yet, we already know what to do with crushed glass. As a matter of fact, Madam Speaker, the idea is that to take the crushed glass out of the landfill waste stream. But do you know what they do with the crushed glass at this time? Crushed glass had a problem in terms of the waste stream because of volume. You have the air trapped inside the bottle. So what the receiver in this materials management plan that he has and has been implemented is they actually take the glass and they crush it. They don't grind it like typically when we talk about crushed glass, or it's into fine powdery substance, but they crush it. They run a bulldozer over it, and it's crushed, so there's no longer any volume associated with empty air in between the glass. It's crushed, it's broken, and then they use that for cover. So it gets it mixed into the dirt, and it's made part of the cover, the daily cover for the landfill. Now, if you take that waste stream of crushed glass out of the daily cover, you're just going to have to add more dirt to the daily cover. So your volume remains the same, and you're not extending the lifespan of the landfill by removing the crushed glass, because you're adding more of the same material that you use for cover to ensure that you cover the landfill and the cells to prevent smell and of course vermins and flies. So the way we're handling crushed glass at this time under our waste stream and our materials management plan already takes into account beneficial use of the glass itself. And I just think that requiring now to spend another $250,000 to do another study for it, I just think it's really, really, kind of unnecessary at this time, given how we're handling crushed glass or glass at this time in our waste stream. The other alternative, man, is let's just ask the receiver. Let's just ask, hey, You have handled landfill operations. What's the best way to use crushed glass? Give us a report. And I don't think it's going to cost us $250,000 to ask them. Why do we want to do that? Why do we want to spend money where, in my estimation, at least in my view of the way that things are, we don't have to spend this money, Madam Speaker. You know, the governor just announced he's releasing $2.9 million out of the recycling fund to give to the mayors for recycling. Make that part of the study. I don't know, but 2.9 million, 2.5 million. I mean 250,000. We're ahead of a budget, and again, I'm speaking, of course, a little painfully here as the committee chair that will have to deal with the budget. But all of these are resources that we can use to manage the operations of the government and deliver the services. And at this time, Madam Speaker, I think finding beneficial use for glass within our community does not require $250,000. I think the resources are out there, the expertise are out there within this government, and even outside of this government, within the receiver operations. Most certainly, they would tell you, I would say in a week's time, they'll give you, 5 or 6 reports to find out exactly what's the most beneficial way to use it. And you got to add value to it in order to make it commercially viable. And we did that already with a law that says if somebody has crushed glass sitting in the back of their house, they can actually take that to Paris Brothers and say, by law, you have to buy this to mix it with your asphalt or to mix it with your cement. So we can find entrepreneurs who can go to the different bars and say, look, if you were going to throw away your bottle and throw it away, it's going to cost you, $150 a ton to do that because that's the commercial rate, or whatever the commercial rate is. I'll take it off your hands for $50 a ton. I'll get myself a glass crusher. I'll crush it, and then I'll go and sell that to Paris Brothers or Hawaiian Rock or Nipo, whoever is manufacturing asphalt, paving, cement. All of those are out there, and we ask ourselves, so why isn't it happening? And maybe that's where this kind of discussion is beneficial. Why isn't it happening? Because the government's not getting behind it, number one. And the government, to get behind this, the government doesn't have to spend $250,000. The commitment's got to be there from EPA. The commitment's got to be there from the front office. The commitment is there from this legislative body because we have passed the necessary policy to add commercial value to the glass itself. So, Madam Speaker, it's the other arms of this government that need to come together and implement what is already policy without having to spend additional money. And once again, we're ahead of the budget, but we're appropriating all this money, Madam Speaker, and I really just say that when I think we need to kind of just step back a little bit, take our time a little bit, count our pennies, because we're not out of the woods yet. No matter what anybody says, we have many, many challenges upcoming in this upcoming budget. We've added $40 million in operating costs to this government in just payroll alone for law enforcement and the Hayes study in the next fiscal year budget. And we are now getting proposals to already appropriate money ahead of that, ahead of meeting that obligation. We just appropriated $350,000 ahead of those operational requirements of this government. Now we're going to do $250, Madam Speaker. And so I ask this body to consider that this is not our money, this is the people's money. Do we really need to spend this money at this time for this purpose, given what resources are available out there to achieve the same objective that we have with regards to the policy that we're trying to set with this bill? I agree with this bill. I just think that we don't need to spend $250,000 to bring focus to this issue. We just need commitment from EPA, the governor's office, Public Works, and the Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber of Commerce should step in and saying, hey, here's a chance for us to avoid spending $250,000. Paris Brothers, Hawaiian Rock, our small business committee, how can we work with EPA and so forth and come up with this pilot project? Let's not spend 250. Let's just spend the manpower resources that we have and the expertise that exists in this government and in this community and not pay $250,000, Madam Speaker. I'm confident that if we put one person on this, have them dog it, work with the Chamber of Commerce, work with the governor's office, work with EPA, work with DPW, work with this body and those interested in this public policy, that we already have the requisite public policy that adds value to that glass. And all we need is to put our collective heads together and then put into place a program that would take that economic value of the glass and translate it into a program that will help our community. But once again, the goal of taking glass out of the waste stream is not to manufacture new products. At least I haven't heard that. I haven't heard that what we want to do is value add to the glass beyond crushed glass used in asphalt and glass fault and so forth. That what we want is to make it into lamps so that a $10 or a bottle is now can be sold for $20 used as a stand on the lamp. That's value added to that. That's not what we're saying we want to do here. We're just saying what kind of program we're going to put together. And again, put the chamber together, put EPA together, put DPW, put the governor's office, put members of the body who have an interest in this thing, and we can come up with a program and a plan and a suggested project that will put into play what we want to achieve here without spending $250,000, Madam Speaker. So while I fully support the intent, I've been at the head of this thing in terms of trying to provide an economic value to that glass. And unfortunately, we haven't had the commitment on the other end. Now that the debate's been resurrected, now maybe we can have those that have that same interest to pick up the ball and put together and dog it so that until such time, with the same determination that the good author had in getting the bottle bill passed, get this thing done. And it doesn't have to cost $250,000. Thank you, and Sidus Masi, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome. On the motions, anybody else? Senator Munya Barnes, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I just want to say, as we continue to look at efforts in, as I said earlier, promoting a cleaner, greener, healthier Guam, and looking at creative ideas to step out of the box to make sure that if a program is started and implementation needs to be done, then it is really important, Madam Speaker, that we put our money where our mouth is and at least provide for the resources that's needed. I know that the retiring speaker brought a lot of great points, if not excellent points up in as far as what needs to be done and the parties that should be engaged into looking into this matter. He brought up the chamber, he brought up the administration, he brought up GIPA itself, he talked about the economic value, and he talked about having engaged all these parties coming together. But Madam Speaker, easier said than done. If we do not make a commitment to provide for the resources, to make it happen so that the program can be successful. So, Madam Speaker, as I can understand where the retiring speaker was coming from, I asked my colleagues to consider this Bill 279-32 LS because it is giving the resources to the agency to go out there, to establish, to create, to get the data, to look for the professional services that are needed, to work with the outreach, to work with the education, to get the people to come together. But in order for us to succeed, sometimes you got to put in a little to get back a lot. So, Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank those who helps make this bill a better bill. If I can put Senator Tom Matt as a co-sponsor on this bill, third co-sponsor, I'd appreciate it, Madam Speaker.
On the motion to make Senator Ada the third co-sponsor,
And then put it down on the voting file, Santa Mossy.
okay. No objections, ordered. And on the motion to send 279-32 to the third reading file without any objections, so ordered. Okay, we will recess until tomorrow morning at 9, and we will continue on our agenda. And the motion, of course, was that those that we've set aside, if the senators are ready, please let the chair know so that then you would be called to place your bill. So we are in recess.